So first of all, I want to thank you guys for coming this morning. We wanted to give you a brief introduction to our class. In this course, we talk primarily about what it means to be human. We've explored this concept through race by reading Parts of Born in Africa by Martin Meredith. We looked at language through learning about abundance, and now we're looking at politeness. The purpose of this interview is to gain information regarding politeness in the African American speech community. Before we get started, we had a couple of background questions. So if each of you could introduce yourselves, state where you're from, and what your occupation or area of study is.
I'll go first. My name is Ranisha Brady. I am a PhD student in the Writing and Rhetoric department. I am from Florida. And I think I covered everything in your question.
And I'm Shirley June. I'm from Georgia, but have lived here in Michigan a number of years. And I was on the campus as an academic advisor for some years before I retired.
We also have a couple of video clips from the George Zimmerman trial before we start the interview. But I don't know how to work this, so.
Okay. I'm not keeping up with the projector, so I have to keep it there. I just don't want it to make a noise, so I didn't turn it on yet. It might be easier if you want to switch your chairs over based on the papers.
Okay.
These are the highlights from the George Zimmerman trial with Rachel Jeantel on the stand.
Yes.
Okay. And did he have a cell phone that had, I don't know what you call those things?
Headset.
Headset?
Yes.
And you know how that was controlled?
Yes.
How was it controlled?
He had a headset.
Like plugs going into your ear and you have a
button to talk to, like a speaker. And
you said the man looked creepy.
Creepy white. Still my language kind of.
Okay. And what did you say? Okay. They're having trouble hearing you, so take your time.
Creepy ass cracker.
Okay. Creepy ass cracker.
Was just looking at him. And I said, oh.
Okay. Can you repeat what your answer was, please?
Creepy ass, what's the question?
What you asked? What?
I asked him how the man looked like. He looked like a creepy ass cracker.
Okay. Let me make sure we got that. Creepy
ass
cracker.
Yeah.
Okay.
He told me the man was looking at him, so I had to think it might be a rapist. Say, you don't know the area, it might have been a rapist.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the answer.
Okay, she's going to repeat it. Could you please repeat your answer?
Go ahead.
So he told me that man was looking at him, so I had to think it might be a rapist.
He started walking home?
Yeah, he's going to leave the area where the melon area at.
So you
He's going to leave the melon area where he was at. Yeah, when you get your melon.
That's what happened.
And then he said, the nigga still following me now. The nigga is still following me now.
And he's still following him?
Yes.
Okay, did he use a word to describe that?
let's go slowly.
And now the nigga is still following me.
Okay. Pardon my language, but did he say the word, pardon my language, did he use the word nigger to describe the man now?
Yes.
Okay.
That's slang.
That's slang?
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Gentel, you mentioned what happened next. Tell me what happened next.
Okay.
Yes.
We need the last question. After you started talking about the All-Star game, you started to say what Mr. Martin said to you on the phone. Could you please repeat it slowly and loudly?
Now the nigga is following me. He said, no, he almost right there. So he almost right by his daddy fiance house.
So, Mr. Martin, you told him to run, and he said no, he's almost by his daddy's.
I object. It's a misstatement of the.
Okay, please sit down. Could you please give your answer again? You have to say it slowly and loudly. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I said I asked him where he at, and he told me he at the back of his daddy fiance house. Like in the area where his daddy fiance by his daddy fiance house. Like I said, a couple seconds later, Trayvon said, "Oh shit."
Okay, let me interrupt a second. When you say the words "oh shit" or my language, who said that?
Trayvon.
He said it to you?
Yes.
Okay. And after he used part of my language, he said, "oh shit." What happened then?
Nigga behind me.
I'm sorry.
The nigga behind me.
Okay, he used the N word again and said, "the nigger is behind me."
Yeah, I was in my bathroom. I was trying to fix my hair for school the next day.
So you were talking. How were you able to talk and fix your hair at the same time?
On Bluetooth.
You were on Bluetooth?
Bluetooth.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tell.
Good afternoon, Mr. Don.
And then, right about February 1st on your birthday, is that when you and he began to talk and text frequently?
Laugh around, yes. Laugh around, yes. Laugh around, playing around, yes.
Mm-hmm. The end time of the call is marked by the other column. There's a start time and then an end time.
Yes.
So, for example, the first call starts at 5:09:36 and then ends at 6:30:01. You see that?
Yes.
44:32.
Yes.
6:49:17.
Yes.
6:53:31.
Yes.
6:53:55.
Yes.
6:54:33.
Yes.
7:11:47.
Yes.
7:15:43.
Yes.
While he was on his way to the store?
Yes.
At the store?
Yes.
He left the store?
Yes.
Do you know which of these phone calls might have been the time when he was at the store?
Nope.
There. That time period is what I'd like to concentrate on for the moment. Are you with me?
No, you lost me.
You don't have any idea then what the distance might be?
No, I never been there.
Before the phone call was made at 7:09:34.
Wait, what? Repeat what you're saying. I'm confused.
Well, there's about 35 or 40 minutes there. I'm sorry.
The rain had caught him from the rain. He got caught by the rain. And he did a shortcut to the Mullet area.
He turned to George Zimmerman and said, "Why are you following me?"
No.
That's the first thing you heard, wasn't it?
I had closed the door. I had a Bluetooth on. I ain't hear nothing. I had a Bluetooth on. And I had to say Trayvon. Yeah. Why you following me? Yes. You can. Don't worry. You can go. You can go.
I'm sorry, it takes me a little bit of time sometimes to come up with the next question.
You can go.
Okay. So at that point then is when you heard what you believe Trayvon Martin to have said, "Why are you following me?"
Yes.
At that point, Zimmerman said, "What are you talking about?"
What you doing around here?
When
What are you doing around here?
you talked with Mr. Crumb, You know, you thought then that somebody at some point would figure that out with the cell phones and then contact you?
Yes. That's not what officers do. When I was first 48,
I didn't hear you.
when I was first 48, they called the first number that the victim talked to.
What? I'm sorry, first 48?
A show. First 48. When a victim died, they called the number that the victim called before. And then they didn't call my number, so, and they had already got the person's case closed, I thought.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Alright, and here is another video of the testimony.
And I had told them, it was Trayvon. It sounded like Trayvon. It had sounded like Trayvon. It had sounded like Trayvon.
Well, today you told Mr. De La Rianda that it was Trayvon Martin's voice.
I had told him that was Trayvon's voice.
Let me show you this. Council's reference page 191. I have you take a look here, beginning with line 18 through line 23. Have you had a chance to read there? Line 18 through line 23? Take as much time as you want. Read the whole thing if you want. Or maybe we could break until the morning if that would be.
No. I'm reading today. I'm leaving today.
Are you refusing to come back tomorrow?
To you?
Are you refusing
Okay,
to come?
we need to keep this a question and answer about her testimony. Any other matters dealing with scheduling, I will make that decision. So if you'll continue to keep reading, please.
You ready now? You finished? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, do you admit then that you were asked who was screaming for help, and your answer was it could be Trayvon?
Yeah.
Actually, it's proper impeachment, Your Honor. This doesn't complete the whole answer.
I'll be glad to finish it.
You need to, please.
Thank you, Judge.
And you had told me it sounded like, I told you it sounded like Trayvon, because Trayvon have a kind of baby voice. You agree with it? Go ahead.
So the question is, well, who is screaming for help? It's not Trayvon, is it? And your answer, it could be Trayvon. And the question, you know his voice so well. Was that Trayvon screaming for help, or wasn't it? Your answer, it could be. Like I said, I don't know, but it could be. The dudes sound kind of like Trayvon. Trayvon, you got that soft voice and that baby voice sometimes. So it could be, I don't know, You know it's not. And that's the end of the quote. Do you acknowledge that you made those statements, those answers to those questions under oath and deposition?
Yeah.
You're ready for the day, Judge.
Any questions?
I'd like to continue. I defer to the court.
How much more time do you think that you need to finish your cross?
Well, I certainly wouldn't. I don't know for sure. I would think we should plan on at least a couple of hours.
What? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break for the evening.
And now we just have some questions pertaining to what you just saw.
Should we go back over here, or are you done with that?
Oh, yeah.
Should
We're done with the videos.
Since we have our third speaker, could you just introduce yourself, where you're from, what are you studying, or what is your occupation?
Oh, yeah, so my name is Maria Martin. I'm a PhD candidate here at Michigan State, so I'll be walking this May. And I'm getting my PhD in African American African Studies. I concentrate in history and women's studies, specifically African women's history. And I just returned from 2 Fulbrights to Nigeria to do research, oral history research on women's activism during the nationalist movement. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay, so before we start with our interview questions, we'd like to know what you thought of the video we just showed. So firstly, what are your initial reactions to the video clip of Rachel Jantel's testimony?
For me, my initial reactions is kind of more reflecting on back in that moment when that case was going on and it was on television and watching it with my mom. We kind of talked back and forth through the trial about what was going on. And particularly I remember my mother saying the defense didn't prepare Rachel. She wasn't ready. They were going to come for her, and she wasn't ready to react to what was coming to her. So I remember my mom saying that, and then now looking at it, I'm kind of thinking to myself, I can see where my mom was coming from, but I can also see the frustration that was coming through, the aggravation that she had, and I can even imagine how she must have felt in that moment, reliving those really traumatic moments where your friend is now no longer with you and you know that they're dead and you were on the phone with them. I can imagine that frustration coming through in her responses and her really wanting to leave that space and not be in that space and relive that. And then to have to constantly repeat yourself over and over and over again. I could just feel that pain and that frustration.
For me, I think I would just, it was hard to really sit through that even now, because just to think of what it must have been like for her, first of all, being in a situation that seemed very foreign to her, and then often being asked to repeat things, and so I just feel she probably felt devalued herself, as well as certainly with much more grief and pain than any of those who would have been experiencing, who were questioning her. So just the whole process was discomforting.
I think that my initial reactions were, well, at the time, that there's always a disconnect between these, this social hierarchy. So the people on the top of the social hierarchy in a society that's based and built and founded on principles of white supremacy are going to be out of touch with those who are placed at the other end of the spectrum, which are going to be people who are not white, who don't have certain characteristics, who don't use English in a certain way. And so that was her, you know, so she represented a lot of that separation, that degree of separation that we see in the social hierarchy in the U.S. So for me, when I was looking at, the coverage when it was first, when the trial was fresh, when everything was coming out, and there was all this commentary about her and her language use, I was thinking that, of course, there's going to be a lot of attacks on her because of the way that she speaks, and she's coming from a different cultural background, and a different language background than the majority of people that would be in the courtroom. So I knew there was going to be, a lot of turmoil because of, the language that she was using, because of her mannerisms, because it's a whole culture that, these people aren't really used to seeing, and they don't see it as American, so I knew there was going to be a lot of backlash. And when I look at it now, I'm just thinking a lot about, again, her mannerisms, the culture, and then also the language, because I'm sure that you guys have been learning about Black English, and Black English is its own entity. And, so she's using a lot of Black English, and this is foreign, to the attorneys and to the judges, to a lot of the people that are in the courtroom, to a lot of the spectators. And so there's that degree of separation where people don't know or understand, the cultures that are seen as beneath them, or a degradation of that white supremacist culture that we have in the U.S.
Okay, secondly, as an African American woman, do you feel a connection to Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. I most definitely feel a connection to her. Particularly being a quiet person, being someone that's not the outspoken person at all, using my facial expressions a lot. I can definitely relate to her on that level, and how people read that as having an attitude or whatever. But definitely.
I would certainly say yes, in terms of, even though there are years between our ages, but yet, being African American, there would be so much similarity in terms of experiences, even experiences in terms of what to expect from a judicial system sometimes. So yes, I'd certainly would identify with her.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Of course, on a cultural level. So when I'm looking at, her mannerisms, when I'm looking at some of the phraseology that she's using, when I'm listening to the tones that she's using, and, all of these things that I'm familiar with, and words that I'm familiar with, but that I know that society perceives as a marker of a lack or a lax intelligence, So I see that, she's using this culture that's common and that's understood, that's been experienced by me and a lot of other African American youth, as well as older African Americans. But I see that there's a connection there, and that's what when I look at the clips, I feel, a little aggravated that people still in this day and age tie all of these stereotypical ideas to what their perception of Blackness is, instead of allowing Blackness to be diverse, allowing Blackness to be, what it is, and to stand alone. So yeah, I do feel connected to her, and just having experienced the culture in the way that she's using it.
Moving on to questions regarding the trial. Did you follow the Trayvon Martin court case, and what were some of your thoughts of the case?
I did not follow it consistently during the trial. Intermittently, yes. Some of it was hard to sit through because just having to, since one more African American young man who has been killed, in this case a teen killed by an adult with a gun. There are just so many, there's just been too much of that already. And so the trial itself was hard to really follow. And I found sometimes, for me, I need to take a personal break from some things. And it's more or less monitor the things that I'm emotionally giving vent to. And so that was one of them.
I also followed the trial. Like I said, my mom, she's all about court cases, so she was watching it the whole time. So I really didn't have a choice to kind of tune out because it was always on television. I watched it. I don't know if my thoughts of the trial are any different than what they were back then, but I remember being really frustrated. I remember going to rallies and seeing the frustration and anger and aggravation and then at the same time, the anger, frustration, and aggravation, but also the hope that something would actually happen, that justice would be served. And then it's a lot of disappointment as well.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I was extremely sad, about the whole case and about the loss of life. But I was angered at how they put him on trial for his own murder. So they were asking questions that just demonized him, I do believe, like about him smoking weed and, things like that. Things that had nothing to do, like your son probably smokes weed down west. So now what, So does he deserve to be shot and killed? I mean, no, So, and this is what I was thinking at the time, is that when these young Black people do things, and they could be doing the same things. These teenagers could be doing the same things that other groups of teenagers are doing, but they get demonized even more heavily for it. They get criminalized. They get pushed into a certain category, and then the public says, "Oh, they deserve this." So he deserved to be treated like this because he's a thug. So they tried to paint a picture of him and paint an image or portrayal of him that he was this thug and he was just attacking people and he deserved to be shot. And I thought that was extremely unfair because that's not what's going on here. We're trying to see if George Zimmerman actually killed him or if he had probable cause to kill him. But they're basically, just crucifying and demonizing Trayvon Martin throughout the trial. So that was very much so upsetting. And I think that as a community, I was thinking about this, as a community, Black people were watching, very closely to see what would happen with this case and to see if there was hope, for justice to be had in this case, or to see if it was going to be like the Emmett Till case where, of course, the people, even though, it was clear and evident that these two men, and there was eyewitness testimony that these two men killed Emmett Till, they just got off, because of the perception of Blackness in the nation. And so the Black community was watching closely to see if this perception had changed or if, the stereotypes are somehow leaving and we could, obtain this American idea of justice, but that didn't happen. And I think a lot of people, myself included, were very let down, by the outcome of this trial. It's just falling in line with a historical precedent that Black people are not citizens of the nation and therefore don't deserve justice.
I actually have two questions for you all. One is, how do you feel Rachel Johnson was treated in the courtroom? And secondly, do you think that she was belittled by her speech in the courtroom? So those are my two questions.
Well, at times, I think she was not, I don't think she was respected in some cases. I think her style of speech was used as a judgmental factor against her. And I think those who were, I'm not trying to say what's in their heads, but sometimes people will make judgments on things that are learned traits even, like language, and then attach the worth of a person to that. And then I find that particularly upsetting when you consider the history of literacy in this country for African Americans, and that for way back there were anti-literacy laws and that kind of things, such that even the attempt to read and write was forbidden, and people who violated that were punishable by law. So there were these legitimized forms of discrimination. And the development of the oral tradition, or the continuation of an oral tradition, which is so much a part of our culture, was in many cases a survival technique. And then to later say, because a person speaks in this pattern of speech, then it's somehow that they're less valued or less intelligent even. So I find that extremely upsetting, but also recognizing that much of what we still experience at this point in the U.S. is still a reflection of entrenched forms of discrimination. Been there for years, and now much of what's happening is just a reflection of what's there. But still, there's hope. We have to deal with reality.
I just have a quick question. Do you think it will ever change? I just had to follow up with that question after you said that.
Oh,
yes.
Yes, partly because you're sitting here in this WRA class, and you're here as young people at MSU that has all kinds of opportunities for cross-cultural interchange and travel, and a chance to evaluate old ideas, and a chance to look honestly at, okay, what are the integral parts of our nation? How was it really started? How, where do you see patterns that are inherently racist, inherently unjust, that impact communities? Whether it might be communities of color, it might be a matter of class. Where do these exist? And so, do I see hope? Yes. And partly because you're sitting here, and I have hope for you. Those of us who have been here a while, we'll say, please take your opportunity seriously, and not just trudge in the path of what's been there for forever and a day. Yes, hope.
And I think thinking about Rachel in that courtroom and how she was treated because of her language, I think, unfortunately, just like Maria was just saying how Trayvon was on trial for his own murder, I think she was on trial as well. I think people automatically wanted to see whether she was going to be credible. They were paying attention to every aspect of her. I think it was her language, absolutely, but also the way she looks, how old she was, where she was from, what's her background. All these things in our culture, in our society, plays a role in whether people believe you or not. It plays a role in the way people think, or they don't think that you're an authority or whatever. And so I think that those things were actually playing a role in how people were perceiving her and thinking about her as well. As this young Black woman who speaks, I believe, multiple languages, not just Ebonics, that those things were playing a role in how people were judging her and thinking about her. So that language thing was just another box to check off.
Yeah, I think it's quite paradoxical, though, that in an individualistic, society such as we have, Black people, and we have the example of Rachel Gentile, are not allowed to be individuals. So when she was on the stand, she was there representing, and she knew, and I watched some other clips, and she said she knew that she was representing Trayvon and, you know, everyone else in her community, you know, to the broader public. So when, for example, I had this conversation in one of my classes with my students, and they were bringing up, you know, the point, they were talking about police brutality and things like that, and imagery that we see on the news, you know, when it comes to protesters. So they compared black protests and white protests. And of course, the black protesters, you know, there was always this savagery and animalistic, you know, adjectives and tones, you know, negative, really negative tones and adjectives used. But with the white protesters, we didn't see any of that. Even though the black protests were actually for, you know, important causes, and maybe the white protest that they were comparing it to was the loss of a sports team or something like that. You know, so with black people, when they come out and they protest, they're not, they don't have that right to be an individual or just to be this group of people. Whatever they're doing, it's reflected, it's used to define the whole group, you know. So with Rachel, you know, people are looking at her and, you know, really picking her apart, but they're looking at her as a way to define, you know, black people. Like, so she's a representative of black people. And I think that other students that I've talked to here at MSU have also said the same thing, that, you know, when they're in class and they speak, you know, it's like they're speaking for all black people because of the lack of integration that we still have in society today. So that individualism, I think, you know, is really important when we look at her case. And like I said, you know, blackness isn't allowed to be diverse. And so when we look at her case, you know, she should not have to stand in the gap for Trayvon. She shouldn't have to, you know, represent him and his attitudes or his actions. She should only have to report on it for the court case. But I think that Don West kept trying to, you know, agitate her kind of on purpose from some of the things that he asked her. They were really disrespectful. You know, like, do you understand English? You know, she said, well, I've been speaking English to you this whole time, you know. So there's a degree of separation there between standard English and what's right, what's seen as right in the broader public, and Black English, which is seen as a negation of what is proper English, you know. So there's a lot of dynamics going on, but I think that within those dynamics, he was being disrespectful, you know. And I think that, again, she wasn't allowed to be looked at as an individual, but she's like, oh, well, this is black people. This is how black people are, you know. And I think a lot of people kind of reacted that way and took that stance, and they kind of doubled down on the stereotypes that they had about blackness and black people, and saying, oh, well, this is just what black is. And another, you know, point that I'll make is that my students, they brought up this idea that when we see all of these mass shootings and, you know, killings in the universities and the high schools and things like that, there are a lot of young white males that are doing this. And we don't, you know, judge all young white males as mass murderers or, you know, killers or mass shooters or anything like that. They're allowed to be individuals. So when these people do these crimes, they're allowed to be individuals. Well, that's just his crime. All white people aren't this way. But if we see Rachel Gentile or, you know, another black person, you know, do something, then, oh, this is what black people do. You know, it kind of gets tied to the whole group. So I just think that that's interesting that, you know, that paradox of individuality that, you know, basically denied to Rachel on the stand and in the commentary in the media. And I think that that's a very strong and very serious disrespect right there, that she's not allowed to be an individual, but it was also very disrespectful the way that, you know, the superiority, you know, that I think Don West and other people in the courtroom showed, and the dominance, you know, that they showed when they're talking to her and talking down to her and talking to her as if, you know, she's just unintellectual, you know. asking her if she speaks English when she obviously speaks English, you know.
This was already touched on a little bit, but I wanted to ask you if you felt that Chantel was treated differently because of her age, her race, and her gender, either one of those factors or all of them combined. Just how do you think that affected her treatment in the court case when she was giving her testimony?
Well, I think I started talking about that a little bit, that all of those factors kind of played a role in how she was perceived immediately before she even opened her mouth. And I really believe that it's a combination of all those things that contributed to the response that people had towards her.
I mean, I agree. I think that, of course, you know, if we read, you know, a lot of the gender scholars like Bell Hooks, or especially Patricia Hill Collins, who talks about intersectionality, and that in the case of Black women, there are interlocking oppressions. So, you know, race, class, gender, you know, there are interlocking oppressions that that impact their realities. So I do believe that, you know, when she's taken the stand, whatever ideas are tied to her race, whatever ideas are tied to her gender, you know, whatever ideas are tied to her socioeconomic class and status are going to be at play, and they're going to impact people's perception of what she's saying in the courtroom. So yes, I do think that a lot of those ideas that were tied to her race, class, and gender did impact the way that people responded to her and treated her, and the boldness with which they responded, you know, to her with degrading comments, you know, just like if she speaks English, you know, things like that. So yeah, I think that that played a big part in it.
I just wanted to make sure you got a chance to answer the question. But each of you briefly spoke about Ebonics. You referred to it as Black English, and as you know, Ebonics is widely used in African American culture and hip hop culture. So my question was, do each of you include Ebonics in your speech repertoire? And if not, do you have any experiences?
Yeah, man, for sure. All day. That's just what we do. All day. Yeah.
It be a part.
Yeah, it be like that.
Perhaps Dave can, it's kind of related to the question, Dave.
Hi, I just want to ask you guys about, do you guys code switch? What I mean by code switch is like such as like switching your language depends on your situation. And would like to ask if you so, and tell us why or why not, and do you think you should have code switch?
I think code switching is a part of life, certainly for me. And it's something that happens so easily, depending on if you're with family members, if you're with people in your community. And it's not often a conscious thing, but it certainly is something that happens often, and that I feel is it's just a normal way of navigating from day to day, and respecting the context in which you find yourself.
One last. Oh, sorry.
It's kind of related.
Oh, I was. Yeah, I think that code switching is a part of our everyday realities, you know, especially speaking as a Black woman. I do realize that I have to code switch because my culture, and even my look, the way I wear my hair, you know, the color of my skin, all of that is very highly politicized. I remember when I was teaching, like over the summer, last summer, I think, and I came into the classroom, you know, if my hair was straight, then people were okay. And then I came in with my afro, and people were like, "Oh my goodness!" Like it shocked them or something, you know, even though they know that I'm black, you know. And so you have to really be aware of yourself and how you carry yourself and what you look like, and try to fit into the model, I think, of what is perceived of as right or as intellectual or as professional. So then that causes us to have to code switch because, you know, when we come with a different culture, then that's, you know, 9 times out of 10 not seen as intellectual or professional or assimilating to the standard that's already set into place. And I think that this is why we're driving, you know, multiculturalism more, so that we can have more inclusion in our, especially as teachers, in our pedagogies and in the classroom and, you know, in the curriculum of the university. But until we, you know, finally break through that glass ceiling of this one standard, you know, that's been placed, you know, and built up strong in this nation, we will have to code switch. And so I wouldn't be able to, you know, speak to you in Black English and still be perceived of as intellectual or intelligent, you know. And then even when people, if I'm, you know, in my community or if I'm around some of my friends and we're out somewhere and we're talking, if we're using Black English, you know, people will look at you and, you know, they'll kind of judge you by the language, like we were talking about. They'll judge you by the language that you're using, and they'll decide in and of themselves that, oh, your intellectualism is at a markedly lower capacity than my own, you know, because you're different than me. So in this context, in this country, I think we treat difference. I think we put stereotypical ideas on difference. So we treat difference as a marker of being less than, I think, you know. So yeah, I think until we bridge that gap and bridge that divide and don't use these characteristics of culture to judge people's awareness, consciousness, and status, you know, in the society, that we will have to code switch. But I think that it's unfortunate. You know, on one hand, of course, we have to use one common language. If we're all coming together from different languages and cultures and things like that, it makes sense to do that. But it doesn't make sense to degrade or disrespect other languages and cultures because it's not this one standard. So I think that, yeah, until we, you know, do something about that, we'll have to code switch.
Yeah. Just still going off of the Ebonics questions. What do you think about Rachel's use of Ebonics in the court testimony?
I think she was just being herself. This was her natural speech pattern. So she was just doing what she normally did. Now, she probably did not have the mastery level to be able to communicate in a way that they would have been more open to. But that was as much their deficit as hers, I would say.
Yeah, she communicated in a way that seemed natural to her, and it was a way for her to be able to communicate her truth about what happened in that moment. I think that, you know, what you're saying about it's kind of code switching and things like that has to do with being able to access that language. I don't think that if you haven't been in an environment or you haven't been forced or it's been drilled in you, like it's been most of us, to learn how to speak in a certain way or how to write in a certain way, if you haven't had that experience, how can you expect someone to use that type of knowledge? It's just not fair to judge somebody by something that they haven't been exposed to or haven't been forced to learn and adapt to in a way where when they're put in that situation, they automatically go to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same, that she was using the language and the mannerisms that were, very normal to her. And I think that there was a great disconnect with the way that people perceived those mannerisms and that language because there's such a degree of separation between the cultures, and between people still in the U.S. So I think that, one of my major thoughts about the footage is that if people really knew more about the cultures that are existing in the U.S. and the differences in English language as they are used by these different cultures and different groups of people, that there would have been less of a disrespectful commentary on, her performance in the courtroom.
Do you think there are any correlations between ebonics and in politeness and politeness? So, and the other question is, can you identify some rules of politeness and impoliteness in the African American speech community, such as like respecting elders or speaking to people when you enter into a room, both non-linguistic and linguistic?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that politeness did play a part. Politeness and impoliteness, that's a part of any culture. So it's going to be a part of any cultural traditions or any language that comes, from any specific culture. And when they're in the courtroom, whenever she perceives Don West to be disrespectful, her mannerisms change. The way that she's sitting, it changes. The way that the tone in her voice, changes. The look in her eye changes. So and then also some of the words. So I think at one point she was saying, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, Mr. Don. Like, so she did that as a way to show him respect, but the tone that she was using, it was to let him know, I'm being polite, but this ain't polite though, this is impolite, don't get me wrong. So the tone that she was using was a way of defending herself against the, attacks that, she was getting from his questioning. And then just overall, I think, yeah, of course, politeness and impoliteness in the Black community, especially as I experienced it, is very much ingrained in the language and in nonverbal ways. So, for example, like she was saying, Mr. Don. So if I met someone and they're older than me, I'm supposed to call them Miss or Mr. And use their last name. I'm not supposed to call adults by their first name. Never call your parents by their first name or else. So things like that. There's rules that we know that we come here, that we're taught, that we know are respectful. How to show respect. So I know that that's also connected to a lot of African cultural traditions, because when I was in Nigeria, it was the same thing. They have to say yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir. They're not allowed to call the adults by their first names and things like that. But even within their language, because I speak Yoruba, so when I was there, I had to learn, like, even within their language, they had honorifics that you had to use. So you had to address elderly people with an honorific, and if you didn't, they would snap you up. They would let you know right away. So yeah, I think that politeness and impoliteness are very deeply ingrained in the culture, and even pre-American Black culture is very deeply ingrained.
And respect for elders, particularly, is important in African American. It's been a while since I was in Nigeria, but just but the amount of respect in in public ceremonies. That would be very important. And I think there's a carryover in terms of African American culture here. Yes.
Yeah. At the end of the day, she didn't go off. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, because there's always these public perceptions of Black women, especially in the media and on television, of us being really aggressive and like snapping at people. She didn't do that. You know, she's like Mr. Dong. You know, and you know she did have the looks or whatever, but at the end of the day, she didn't go off. She didn't perform in that way that people expected her, and I think the way he was antagonizing her and kind of pushing her to do it, she didn't do it. So I'm like, girl, yes.
Growing up, did you feel that some people took your tone of voice as impoliteness?
I'm a very quiet person, so I don't think, probably not my tone, but definitely my facial expressions have probably been taken as, oh, you know, that's impolite. You shouldn't look like that. And as my friend says, who always has facial expressions like me, she's like, I can't see my face. So I take that excuse. I can't see my face. But I don't think my tone necessarily has been taken as impolite, but definitely my other ways of communicating might have been taken that way.
I would have to agree that the nonverbals, especially, have often spoken volumes, so to speak. And I've often been told, especially that you, watching my face, I'm saying so much more than my mouth is saying. And so,
yeah, I mean, I think so. I think so. That it seems as if, you know, we have these ideas out here, like we can look at Michelle Obama and the commentary on Michelle Obama. You know, people kept trying to push her into this box of an angry Black woman because there are certain ideals that are tied to, you know, Black women and then dark-skinned Black women, you know, and all of these things. So they tried to push her into that box, but she never fit, you know. So after a while, you know, the commentary kind of changed. You know, well, they didn't change it. They just left that because they saw that, you know, there was no root in it or no viability in it. So I think that, you know, if she can be, or if people can attempt to put her into that box, and it's not as if she can be mistaken for being an angry Black woman. She's definitely not that. You know, so she's her and President Obama are at the top of their game. So, you know, but people still try to characterize them with these stereotypical ideas of Blackness. So if that can happen to them and they're in the highest offices of the land, then it definitely does happen to everyday African American people. And I'm sure that has happened to me as well over my, especially in my career in the university. You know, people can take your tone, and this has happened with students in classes too. I remember, you know, I don't know how many of you know about the or heard about the University of Missouri team that protested by not playing. Like, we're not playing football until you know, we get some changes around the university, because there's a lot of oppression and racism that these students of color are facing across the campus. And so when they did that, a lot of campuses started proactively trying to have conversations about cultural inclusion and race and things like that. And so MSU tried that. And so I went to the talk with the president here, and some of the students, you know, were coming up, giving their voice, and the Black students were saying that they were being treated a certain way in class. And so, for example, one young male said that he came into class and he had on a bandana, and the professor immediately, "Why are you wearing that? Is that a gang color?" And, you know, when there's another white student who comes in every day with a different bandana and, you know, kind of the skater look, and she says nothing, you know, to them every day. So just because this student is Black, there's something that the teacher perceived as a threat when he wore that bandana. So it's the same as, you know, it's the same type of perception and reaction by professors that I heard students talking about when they would, you know, answer questions in a certain way or use a certain, you know, tone of voice that they didn't perceive as impolite because it's not impolite in their community. But, you know, if they lack that refinement of how and when to code switch, then, you know, what they say and do can be perceived as disrespectful in the classroom. So, like, if I greet one of my friends, this is an extreme example, nobody's going to do this, but if I see my friend and I'm talking to my friend, I haven't seen her for a long time, and she tells me something surprising, like, girl, shut up. No, you know, that didn't happen. But, you know, you can't do that to people who are outside of the cultural groove because they'll, what? Why did you tell me to shut up? You know? So, so like, that's just one extreme example, but it's an example of how students, even, you know, here at Michigan State specifically, are experiencing marginalization because of, you know, they're using this culture and they're coming up against that refinement. Like, they have to learn that refinement or be refined in how and when and where to code switch. And I think, you know, there's some, you know, I'm especially championing this, is that we should have some conversation about how to understand different cultures so that these students aren't marginalized in the classroom.
Okay, so with impoliteness pertaining to Rachel Jeantel in the court case, with your experience in the African American speech community, do you think she behaved politely or impolitely, and why?
I think the second question also, because it's related.
And then how did it reflect politeness or impoliteness?
I think there was some of both. That at times she was polite, she tried to be cooperative, and then at times she was just fed up. And her tone indicated that in some cases, facial expressions. So I think we saw both. But considering everything, I think she handled herself rather well.
Yeah, I agree too. I think that there was both. I wanted to point out too that while we're talking about our own experiences with politeness and impoliteness, when you look back at this footage and analyze it, you'll see that most of the time we both wait for her to give her answer first, and then the both of us, you know, so that, you know, then we answer after she gives her answer and has had ample time to do that. So that's another, you know, marker of respect, that you defer, you know, to those that are above you, you know. But yeah, I think that in terms of her testimony, Rachel's testimony, that she did use politeness and impoliteness at certain points, and I think that she did it, you know, I think that she did it to make a point, you know, at certain times. So it was very decisive, you know, and I think that during the exchanges, during the contentious exchanges with John West, she tried to remain polite, but, you know, in her tone, we can see some of the impoliteness, you know, coming out as a way to defend herself. So I think that she did use definitely both.
I think in terms of impoliteness, like the impolite things that we keep pointing out is that, I don't know. I think that those moments were in times where she was kind of like reasserting her agency. Like, I'm human, I'm tired, I've been here hours, you keep telling me to repeat myself, I'm frustrated. Like, I kind of see those moments as kind of like reminding people, hey, look, I'm a person too. I have things that I need to be able to pay attention to. Please talk to me with respect too, and if you don't do that to me, I'm not going to give you that back. So just like reasserting, you know, my agency and my right to say what I need to say and be able to be dismissed in this really awkward situation.
How did Rachel present herself through language and present herself nonverbally?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
How did Rachel present herself through language and present herself nonverbally?
I think she attempted to use both media. At times she would, well, whenever she was trying to answer a question, she answered it the way she would normally speak. But additionally, non-verbally, I think, I don't know whether it was just a natural response or whether she was trying to say, look, enough of this. But you certainly could see that in her shiftings, or her facial, her eye expressions. So whether in each case she had, thought about it, I think she was just acting out the frustrations and the fatigue and the just sick of this sort of thing. But,
Did you restate both of them? Did you ask both of them?
How did Rachel present herself through language and present herself non-verbally?
Yeah, I agree with what you said. That I think that she did try to use, or she did use the language that was most common to her at the time, and of course, non-verbally, she did let people know, that she was frustrated, like especially when he had her read the transcript, and she was scratching her head, and then she did like this, like, you can take it away. She was just letting them know that, okay, we've been through this many, many times. I think that the way that you're asking the questions at this point are condescending, and I think that she would have been okay because she knows this is a serious case. Even though in the beginning she didn't know that was going to grow to this point. She thought, okay, well, this person did this to Trayvon, and now they've caught this person. She thought that it was going to be over. She said that, and now she sees that it's a much bigger thing. So she's okay with that, and she understands her role in it, having been the last person. That's why she gave that first 48 example, having been the last person to speak to Trayvon. So she understands she's going to have to go through this rigorous process. But where she starts to, use many more nonverbal mannerisms is when, they're very condescending. After the questioning has degraded her or has tried to make her appear as non-intellectual in some way. So yeah, I think that she definitely used a combination of those nonverbal and verbal cues to let people know.
That concludes our questions. Thank you for your time and helping us understand politeness.
I just have one question that is in like the extra question, just in case we got to it. But my question is, how do you think the way that you speak, like on an everyday basis, your own speech is accepted by those outside of the African American speech community, and how do you think it's perceived, like with those inside of the African American speech community?
That's a good question. My speech, outside of the African American community, I don't know. I never really thought about it. That's why I said it was such a good question. I think that, well, I can speak from my experience. I'll just start there. I grew up in a predominantly white school system. That's all I went to, and I was the only Black person a lot of the times. So when I went to a new environment where I was around more Black people, not a lot, but more, oftentimes I got picked on because I talked proper. And it was something that made me feel uncomfortable for a while, but I started to think of my language as more fluid. So when people say code switching, I don't really see myself code switching. I see myself blending the different varieties of English that I've been exposed to and kind of coming up with my own style. So no matter whether I'm in an African American community or I'm in a community of other people from different cultures and experiences and backgrounds, I feel like that language still translates. And I may move it and say different things depending on who specifically I'm talking to, but I see it as very fluid.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that, of course, there are certain terms and words, certain mannerisms that I could use, verbal and nonverbal cues that I could use that would be well understood, within the African American speech community. And then outside of that community, of course, it will be a whole different perception, and that perception would be reinforced by historical precedents of, stereotypical ideas about Blackness and Black people. So those are two very different worlds to walk in, and that's why we do code switch. That's why we do have to code switch to try to. I think of it as a way to maintain dignity. That's why we code switch, because if I didn't code switch, there would be a lot of commentary and ideas about my capacity, intellectual capacity, and my cognitive abilities and things like that. So to save myself from that and to therefore save my dignity, then I'll code switch when I'm not in an African American community. But even like she said, when I am in an African American community, I think that I was talking to one of my friends that's from Memphis, and I asked him, I was talking to him about some words, some language patterns and things like that they use there. And it's very different in Memphis, and in other places of the South, like how African American language and mannerisms are used versus maybe like the Midwest or something like that. There are some terms and some mannerisms that are still the same, but there are a lot of difference, especially on inflection, how syllables sound together. Instead of saying man, he says main. That's something that my grandmother did. Instead of saying man, she said main, because she's from Arkansas. So it varies in different places. And when I talked to him, I asked him, so how do I sound to you? And it was the same thing as what, Rodney was talking about. He said, we'd say you sound like a white girl. And I said, what? I said, what? So that was, that's just a metaphor for, we would say that you sound pretty proper, to us. And that if you were to come, he told me that if you were to come with me to a family function or something like that, you probably wouldn't even be able to understand what we're saying, even though we're going to be speaking English and we're speaking Black English, but it's just a whole different, sound and, a different area. It's a different dialect of Black English, actually. So, yeah, I mean, I thought that was very interesting because even within the African American community, we can't just sit here and say, oh, it's just one, it's the same. Black English is the same. It's not. All over from Texas to Alabama to the Midwest, it's going to be different. So we have to allow that diversity, and that diversity is going to determine how people perceive me and my language, when I put it together. So.
Thank you so much.